Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to get a PlayStation 3 controller working with Retropie. I've got 2.4.2 of the version of Retropie installed here, but the principle is going to work pretty much with any of them. And obviously a lot of people have got PlayStation 3s at home, so having a spare controller to hand to get working with Retropie is quite handy. Whilst quite often the more retro style USB controllers that you can get for about £6 or £7 are quite nice feel, quite retro-y. It can be useful just to get a PlayStation 3 controller up and running, and it's pretty easy to do it as well. So what we're going to do here, all I've done here is log in to the remote Pi using username Pi, password Raspberry, and down here the first thing I'm going to do is check to see what the Raspberry Pi has detected. So I've plugged in that PlayStation 3 controller with the USB cable it came with. I think it's a micro USB one end, and then the other end's just the standard USB that goes straight into the Pi. And you can see what the Pi detects by typing ls USB. And there in the list here, it's got the three defaults, so without anything plugged in, it just kind of identifies the USB bus on this point, this one and this one. So these top three are default. Then I've got two more plugged in. So I've got a Raspberry B model, so it's only got a couple of USB ports anyway. So in one, I've got the Sony controller plugged in, and the other I've got a keyboard plugged in at the moment. So I can see without doing anything at all, it's identified that I've plugged it in. Now if you don't get that, it's probably time to check as maybe you need power on the PlayStation, it's got to be charged, or the cable's certainly got to be firmly pressed in. But I mean, this is the most basic state that you should get, really. It should identify the fact that it can see a controller there. So as long as that's the case, you can go on with the next step. And that, what you can do, I'll show you what happens if you try to do this without getting the right drivers on there, just so you can see. So inbuilt with the Pi is a command called jstest, and you can run that against the plugged in joystick. And just to confirm again that the Pi can see it, you can change directory to dev input like that. So that's cd/dev/input, and in that directory, if I list that, you can see there's a device that it can see called JS0. So I know that at least the Pi has got a concept of that joystick. So if I run the command jstest and run that against JS0, it'll probably be quite a lot of text output here. Ignore a lot of that, but the fact is, if you pick up the joystick now and press on that PlayStation controller a load of buttons, if it detects it with this jstest process, it should really flip a lot of those off switches to on, and you'd see a reaction. But I'm getting absolutely nothing by pressing all the buttons there. So effectively the driver's not present to interpret these button presses with that PlayStation. So you can cancel out of that with Control and C, and back to the command line. Now in the default setup with Retropie 2.4, there are a lot of controllers already configured, and you can see those in this directory. So if I change the directory to opt Retropie emulators retroarch /configs, you can see in here, I'll list that properly, there is a Sony PlayStation 1 already loaded there, and we can read it if you type nano Sony PlayStation. You can press tab and it auto-completes, so you can't really get anything wrong typing it. Particularly you've got some brackets here and it's escaped them properly, so it's easier just to press tab once you've started typing to get that to auto-complete. And in here you can see the button presses that should equate to it, so somebody's already produced that file. And down the bottom they've even got the hotkeys set up as well to exit emulator and some other functions. So that's pretty much ready to use, but like we saw a moment ago, the system doesn't know or can't detect that PlayStation controller yet. So we're going to run the standard setup. To get back to the home directory, which is the default one that you start in, you put cd space and that tilde sign, enter, and you get back to the home directory, so that's home Pi. And in here we go to cd retropie hyphen setup, and the capital is important, so make sure that's right. And in that directory we can see we want to run the Retropie setup, so that's sudo space // retropie setup.sh, and I'll run that. Again, this is a stock 2.4.2 install. I haven't changed anything except copy one single ROM to it, so you should get exactly this. Now it's moaning that I haven't resized the card because I've got a 16 gig card, and because I've only just written the image to it, it thinks it's still a 4 gig card, I think. No, 2 gig card with hardly any space, but it's enough space for what we're doing here, so I'm going to carry on with it. But obviously the first thing you'll want to do is resize your card, so you should do that anyway, but that's in separate videos. This is just about the PlayStation. So yeah, I'm going to continue anyway, and I get into the setup, and it's a pretty new image. I'm not going to bother updating the binaries or the emulators at all really. All I want to do is go into setup. Oh no, the first thing actually you should do is update the Retropie Setup script to make sure you've got a current version. It's always worth doing that, and it won't take a moment. So I say update Retropie Setup script, OK, and make sure the Pi is connected to the internet either by cable or wireless, and it goes and updates really quick. It's done it. Press OK, and then I'm going to go to cancel because I've got to restart it. So I've cancelled out of that. I press the up arrow to get the command in, and I'll load it up again, and this time it'll be the latest version, so we can see all the latest options in it. Okay, we are going into the setup option, number 3, and what we want to do really is register the PlayStation that we've got connected here with RetroArch, which runs most of the emulators. But at the moment, without the drivers, it won't recognise the button presses, and I'll show you what happens. So you can see what happens if you try this without the drivers, or the drivers haven't worked. So if I go into that now, it says, as normal, connect only the controller that wants to be registered. So really, this is the only controller I've got. The other one's a keyboard, so it should be easy for this to detect it. Hit OK, and it says at the top there, yeah, found Sony PlayStation 3 controller, so it's seen it quite happily. It says when you're, after pressing a couple of buttons, make sure they're sort of reset. When you're ready, press enter. Okay, so I'm pressing enter, and I'm pressing B now, or the equivalent of B on the controller, and nothing's happening. It just goes to timed out. I'm pressing pretty much all the buttons, none of them are getting detected, and at the top there it's defaulted a load of AXE to these values as well, so it's really having trouble seeing this, and nothing's getting detected at all no matter what I press. So there's no need to continue with that. You can cancel out of that with Control C. Okay, now I'll go back into the setup. Say yes to that again, and what you need to do in setup, down the bottom somewhere, we've got, there we go, 314, install PS3 controller driver. So the setup really is already in the config file that's been created in Retropie. There's no need to do much manually at all. If I select that, there we go, you can see at the bottom there, it's going off to check the files that it needs, the drivers, and the configuration for it. It shouldn't take too long. There's not a massive amount of data that it needs to get, and it also gets the Bluetooth set up as well. So when we exit this, you'll probably see an error relating to the Bluetooth element, but this is, at the moment, all I'm doing is using it in a cabled process. I'll do a separate video about how to get Bluetooth enabled, and so you can use it wirelessly, but it's the same process as far as I can tell for wired or wireless largely. So we'll just continue with this one to focus on the wireless. The controller I've got is, I think it was sort of an original UK one that came with it. The model number is on the back, because sometimes it'd be an American one, or Hong Kong, or even sort of a fake knockoff as well. They probably all work in this manner and it will all get detected, but it could be helpful to know which model you've got. On the back it should say this one that I'm doing it with is CEC HZ C2E. So I think that's just one of the earlier original PlayStation models. It does say it's a DualShock 3, so it's got the, I guess, the vibration field function in there. It's a bit heavier than the standard one, but other than that it's pretty stock original Sony model. But the same process would probably work with third-party controller that you can get for a lot cheaper as well. So I'd follow that same process. And also, when you run the RetroArch setup, or quite a few references in Retropie, make reference to the 4 standard buttons on a, say, SNES pad, which are marked A, B, X and Y. So that's quite a common reference. Obviously on the PlayStation you haven't got those marked buttons, so you've still got 4 buttons, it's just different mapping. So the mapping is A is the circle, and then B is the X at the bottom, Y is the square, and X is the triangle. And then so you can just sort of map it that way, it should work. Okay, that's finished, and it does say, you can see on the screen, please make sure your Bluetooth dongle is connected, so it's kind of geared to get you up and running quickly with a Bluetooth dongle. But again, we're just going to keep this one for wired for the moment, and then we can do a separate one. Okay, so I'm going to press enter here. And there we go. It had a scan for that dongle. Obviously I haven't got one in there, it didn't say it. Please try to reconnect and try again. Okay, and I'm back in the menu. But that's pretty much all we need to do for installing the driver, and I'm going to cancel out of that and cancel out of that. Now earlier we ran a command js test js0. Now because I'm not in that same directory that we were in a minute ago, which is that cd dev input, if I want the JS test to work from anywhere, you just put the full path, so that's /dev/input. So I'm going to run the same thing again. Now we've got the drivers on to check something's changed. Hopefully it has. Okay, still get a load of text. I'll pick up the controller and press some of the buttons at the bottom. Okay, I just tried that, and turns out my controller ran out of power, and that's what happened, nothing. So even if you've done it right and the controller hasn't got any power, you're not going to get any feedback from it. So do make sure it's charged. Okay, I've done it now, it's charged. We're going to run that command again, which was js test dev input js0. Now run that, you can see already there's various buttons getting detected. You know, it's going mad with all the changes that I'm pressing buttons. You see they go on off on the button section, the axes are getting detected. So this is vastly different to where we did it to start with, where there wasn't anything, or if you try and do it without any power. So that is very promising. Okay, so I'm going to quit out of that, and hopefully before the batteries run out again, we're going to reconfigure it, which is back in this directory that we're in, which is HomePie Retropie Setup, shown here. We're going to run sudo space /retropie _ setup, and this time we're just going to configure a controller as normal. Okay, just say yes to that again. You won't get that if you resize your card. Setup. We could use the controller file that's already done for us, but it's clearer if I show how to run through this. Okay, so register RetroArch console. This is going to controller. This is going to take those inputs from the controller and save them in a file so you can use it in the emulators. Okay, connect only the controller, which I've done. And then when you're ready, you press enter, and again it will reference buttons like A, B, which on the PlayStation, but they're in that order. You've got A on the right, B at the bottom, Y on the left, and X is above. Okay, enter, B, Y, select, start, up, and the D pads. This is the sort of directional pad, left and right. A button, which is on the right, X button, which is at the top, so it's quite helpful with the brackets there. Left shoulder button, right shoulder, and then you've got left to trigger, right to trigger. Pressing down on the left 3, pressing down on that other analog one, right, left analog, right, down, up, and then on the right one, go right, left, down, up. Oh, done. Right, so that's everything that it can detect. And the controller does have obviously the PlayStation button in the middle, but RetroArch doesn't really care about that. And I think that was the only one I didn't press. So it does cover a lot of options on the PlayStation there. Okay, and it says here that the configuration file has been saved as Sony PlayStation (R3 controller.cfg). Excuse me. Okay, and it will be used by RetroArch from now on whenever that controller is connected. Now you can use, like it says, it will pick it up automatically and use it, or you could hard code that in the retroarch.cfg. Just check out the other videos about controllers, about how to do that. Okay, so now I can cancel out this, it and we'll just go and look and see what that's actually done, which is, by the way, what you do want to make sure you do before you run this, especially if it's a stock install, quit out of Emulation Station before you start trying to configure it, because it can cause problems if Emulation Station's open at the same time. Sometimes they both try and have a lock on the joystick, so that's the only caveat really. Just if you are booting straight into Emulation Station, quit out of that with F4 on a keyboard, and then run this. Okay, so we're going CD apt Retropie emulators RetroArch and configs. Okay, so in this directory you can see that vast majority of this is the dated January 15th, which is when the image got built, but the one just changed has got today's date, so you can see it stands out because of the date difference, and it's Sony PlayStation, which is basically, you can see it's the same as the one above largely. And what I'm going to do is, in this file that we've just created, insert the hotkeys. There is a separate video wholly about hotkeys, but just a quick one here. What we'll do is edit. I'm going to edit the one above with the hotkeys. So just type the name of that file above, Nano, and then Sony, and then hit tab and it finds it. So that's that one. And I can see that if I scroll down here, at the bottom I've got some hotkey info. The only one I want to use for the moment is the enable hotkey, which 0, which maps to select, and exit, which here maps to start. So I've copied that by selecting it, it's auto copied it. So 0 and 3, and I can see if I scroll up here, 0 is select and 3 is start. Now quit out of that with Control X, and now I'm going to edit with sudo, which means supervisor do, so more permissions just to make sure we can write to it. Nano is a text editor, and I want to edit the one that's just been created here, which is Sony PlayStation. So I type Sony and then capital P, and then hit tab to complete it. This is the file that's just been put together, and it's the same button combination, 0 for select, 3 for start, and at the bottom of that I'll just put in, press the right mouse button and it pastes what's in the buffer. So I've got my exit buttons as well there, and you can see it's logged all the other buttons quite happily. The where are we there? Left, right, which is the shoulder buttons. Left 2 is the trigger, left, right trigger, and then left 3 is when you press down on the analog one on the left and press down on the analog one on the right for R3. And then it's got the axis for those analog as well, which is -0, +1, +2. So you could just write this file out rather than go through that sort of wizard, but the wizard's pretty helpful to get you to this stage. Okay, so I've made these changes, quitting out of it, Control X. It says, do you want to save? I'm going to say yes, and it just repeats the file name for you. I'm going to press enter, and it quits out of that. So that's done really. That's the basics of getting the PlayStation controller detected and configured for RetroArch. If there are other emulators that want to know what the button presses are, you can simply read that file and know the equivalent to put in, like what's another emulator that you might need to do that for? PyFBA. It might want to know what the button codes are, but vast majority are going to use RetroArch anyway, so this would cover the lot. Main would just ask you to press the buttons in the online GUI and the in-game GUI, so you can do that without any problem as well. Once you've put the drivers, you saw nothing really happens before you install the driver. Once you've done that, it's quite happy. Okay, what I'll do now is fire up Emulation Station, and you can just see how that's now detected that now that the driver's installed. Okay, I've just booted Raspberry Pi back up. Now I've cancelled out of Emulation Station before, so I need to manually go back in and fire that one up. So I'll run Emulation Station, which is what you get automatically. Like I did mention before, if it does this automatically, quit out of it and then configure all the controllers that we did. Okay, so we're in Emulation Station, and it's detected the gamepad, which the only one I've got plugged in is the PlayStation one I was using a minute ago. Hold down a button, so I just hold down any button, it says Sony PlayStation, and then it says just configure. So I'm going to press on the directional pad like the image shows there, up, down, left, right, A, which is the circle, B, which is the cross or the X, and start button, select, and then you've got the shoulder buttons left and right, and then I'll press what I set to A, the circle, for OK, and I'm in there. Just navigate as normal with the PlayStation controller. I've got the Genesis set up there. I've not scraped these ROMs for the metadata or anything, I've just copied it there so I can see the name. I'll run that with... Okay, that's fired up. Briefly lost the video there, but hopefully that's shown okay. And I'm going to press start on the PlayStation. It goes back to that screen. Start again. And hit the X button, there we go. It's got left, right. The directionals on this don't do anything, but then that's to be expected. But yeah, the directional pad up, down, left, right's quite happy. Jumps going. I mean this game only does a jump anyway, so. But perfectly responsive. Don't get put off by those jagged edges. You can always cover that with shaders, but this is just getting the controller working, and yeah, there's no problems with it at all, and it's really helpful because everyone's got a PlayStation controller lying about they might want to use for this. Yeah, no problems at all, except I'm not very good at this game. Hope that's been of some use.